All right, once upon a time, a senior center back for a top high school girls soccer team, who was also a team captain, started showing some concerning trends in her weekly impact testing. Through our regular testing, our performance staff flagged her as somebody we should check in on. When we pulled her aside, we discovered she was quietly managing a soft tissue injury. As a senior in her final season, with a college soccer career already lined up, the last thing she wanted to do was miss any training, miss any games, and she was determined to just push right through it. The problem, what looked like a minor tweak, could have turned out to be a catastrophic injury, one that might have ended her playoff run that year and possibly jeopardized her future in college soccer. But because we had the data, we caught it early. Her coach gave her a week of rest, and that was enough to get her back to full strength. She went on to play nearly every minute of 7 straight playoff games, helping lead her team all the way to the state championship match. Without that insight of the testing, the story could have ended very differently for her season and for her future. So how many times have we seen this as coaches, right? Player hiding an injury, player not letting on that they're fatigued, that they're overtrained. Overtraining signs that you wish you had caught sooner, right? Players with a down mood or down energy during training. And maybe just missed talent because a younger player didn't look the part against the older players, but maybe had some high potential long-term that you missed. But what if we could change this? With data, we can keep players healthy and performing well, and we can identify high potential athletes. So let's talk for a moment about the types of information we all rely on as coaches, subjective and objective data. Subjective data includes the evaluations we all make based on our experience and our instincts, like how we rate players on composure, decision-making, soccer IQ, work ethic. It's what we write down during tryouts and what we carry in our heads in between games. Player self-reports, if you guys do any of that, also falls into this category. Things like, how am I feeling, perceived level of fatigue and soreness, or mental sharpness. Objective data, on the other hand, comes from things we can measure. Jump height and force plate metrics, grip strength, VO2 max, and other physiological markers. These don't change based on who's watching or how an athlete describes themselves. They're consistent, they're replicable, and rooted in physiological performance only. Each of these has value, of course, but they also have limits. Subjective data, especially from experienced coaches, is incredibly rich, but it can also be biased, inconsistent, and overly reliant on their own memory and perceived value. We've all had moments where we're watching a player and they just felt off or slow, even though the numbers told a different story. Objective data is solid, but it lacks context. It doesn't tell us who's mentally tough. It doesn't capture a player's leadership ability in the locker room or their soccer IQ. It's just numbers, unless we know how to use them. And here's where things get really exciting. At TeamGenius, we've built the first ever comprehensive database of subjective player evaluations across all ages of soccer. That means we're not just guessing anymore as to what matters. We can now actually see which subjective traits are used most often by coaches, and more importantly, which ones are more predictive of high-performing players. For example, strength and speed might be some of the most commonly rated attributes on players across all age groups, and are a big part of player rankings in the younger age groups. So you think about U11s, U12s, bigger, stronger, faster. The kids that mature earlier tend to get elevated in those player rankings and get the higher team positions. But it turns out that composure, decision-making, soccer IQ are stronger indicators of those who succeed at the higher level. So with this data, we can start to bring objectivity to our subjective evaluations. This does two powerful things. One, it helps reduce our own coaching bias. We can rely on our instincts with actual data and make better decisions. And two, it helps us spot the players who might not stand out right away, but who check the boxes that historically lead to success. So instead of asking who looks the part today, we can ask who checks the boxes that actually matter long term. That's a huge shift. And when we combine that with performance testing now, we can unlock a much clearer picture of an athlete's overall potential. So let's dive deeper into the subjective data we collect. We talk about how soccer tryouts have been traditionally run and how our data now is starting to challenge the traditional approach to tryouts. Across our work at TeamGenius, we've collected more than 6.2 million evaluation scores on over 206,000 soccer players. That gives us an unprecedented view into how athletes are assessed across age groups, regions, and competitive levels. If you've ever run or participated in a tryout, this probably sounds familiar. Coaches typically rate players on a 0 to 5 scale, right? Tryout 0 to 5, often using some version of the 4 pillars of soccer: technical, tactical, physical, and mental. Within those pillars, sometimes we dive deeper into the skills area, like we can break out passing, shooting, dribbling, ball control, all subjective evaluations, and mental attributes like competitiveness, soccer IQ, communication, attitude, or coachability, right? And these are good categories, don't get me wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. When we analyzed all of this data to ask what actually correlates with long-term success, the answers weren't always intuitive. So one surprise that we had was a very common attribute of attitude of a player turns out to be one of the least predictive traits of future success. The reason is that when younger players are assessed on attitude, almost all of them got a perfect score, 5 out of 5. There was no distinguishing the players amongst attitudes, so it really did not help separate your players in overall ranking. It's important for team culture, but in terms of raw predictive power, it's pretty low. Meanwhile, the most consistent indicative trait across all age groups was a physical athleticism, right? Bigger, stronger, faster, not necessarily skilled or smart, but those players tend to stand out in a limited, fixed time tryout environment. Another insight that we had was most players are rated with a 3, essentially, a 3 out of 5, okay? The middle of the road score doesn't tell us much. It's safe, it's neutral, but it doesn't help differentiate talent or identify unique strengths. So what does this mean? It means we're relying very heavily, you could say too heavily, on subjective scoring, especially on a scale of 0 to 5. It lacks nuance. You are not going to get the separation that you would, even if you just scored them 0 to 100 instead. You're at least going to get some separation in the middle. The 0 to 5 ends up being something where I'll drop it at a 3 or a 3.5 or 2.5. It's good enough, but you're not differentiating the players. We also might be missing some key signs of high potential. But with a database this large that we now have the ability to separate what's useful from the noise. And that also allows us to improve how tryouts are structured, how talent is spotted, and how player development is prioritized. So to improve on this is where a concept called the relative value index comes into play. It is also a subjective scoring system, but it's one that brings more consistency and sharper comparisons than traditional methods. So here's the basic idea. Instead of rating each player on a 0 to 5 scale, where everyone tends to cluster around a 3, we anchor the scoring to a reference point, typically the best performer in that category or skill. So we start by identifying the top performing player in a category. Maybe it's technical ability, maybe it's finishing speed, or you could just do an overall score if you're not breaking it down into more detail. That player gets a score of 100. Then every other player is scored on a relative scale from 0 to 99 based on how close they are to that top performer. It's not about perfection. You're not saying that the top performer is a perfect player, but you're giving a reference point to compare every other player against. So why does this matter? Because in most tryouts, the extremes are easy, right? The kids at the bottom, the kids at the top are super easy to figure out, right? It's where we really struggle is with the middle 60 to 70% of any age group. Everyone seems kind of similar. You end up with a list of players rated 3 across the board, and now you're making decisions based on feel or maybe who had a good moment or scored a goal during trials. With an RVI, you get a clear separation between those players. It brings dimension to the middle. You no longer are just saying player A and player B are both a 3. You're now seeing that one might be a 91 while the other is a 67, based on their proximity to the best player. So as you think about what that might feel like when you're on the field, it is forcing you to do a deeper comparison of player to player. And in a tryout scenario, you actually have that opportunity to do that. So these subtle differences can help you make smarter final roster decisions, prioritize who gets developmental attention, or even identify hidden strengths in kids who may have otherwise been overlooked. It's still a subjective method, but it brings in structure and consistency. It forces evaluators to think comparatively, how close is this player to our best, instead of just how good is this player in general. And the beauty of that is it's simple. You can use it across any category, and it works especially well in a group setting like tryouts or ID camps. Ultimately, the relative value index helps you make more informed, confident decisions, especially when the differences between players are not immediately obvious. So let's talk about the objective data side now, and specifically about force plate testing. You may have seen us out there in the exhibitor hall with a set of Hawken force plates there. Because if you're managing a team and not using objective data like this, you could be missing some key information that could impact both the health and performance of your team. Force plates give us a structured, repeatable way to collect real-time information on athletes, neuromuscular readiness, movement efficiency, and potential risk factors, without relying solely on subjective interpretation or waiting for an athlete to speak up if they're feeling hurt or fatigued. And that's important because as coaches, we all know how hesitant many young athletes can be in speaking up when about these chronic fatigue or the nagging injuries. So why won't players speak up? Well, sometimes it's fear of losing playing time. Sometimes it's not just wanting to disappoint their teammates. But either way, it means we're flying blind as coaches unless we have the data that tells us otherwise. Force plates allow us to objectively measure 3 key areas. So when we talk about capacity, are they improving or declining in jump height, total force, or velocity off the force plates? Movement strategy. Are they changing how they produce force? That might signal fatigue or compensation. If, typically a counter movement jump where they go down and jump up, the time to take off is between 0.8 seconds and 1 second. If they're slow in their takeoff, it may mean that they're just fatigued, they're just tired, or they may be nursing something. Asymmetry. Are they favoring one side more and more? That could mean a brewing injury risk. What's great is that these tests are quick. They just take a few minutes per athlete, and with regular use, you can start to see trends. Maybe their capacity hasn't changed, but their strategy has. That tells you they're fatigued or maybe ill. Maybe asymmetry is climbing. That's your cue to start asking questions before it becomes a bigger problem. But, and this is the key part, the power of force plates only really shows when it's implemented with consistency and clear communication. If you cut corners or just spring it on your athletes without explaining why we're doing force plate testing, the athletes might think the data could be used against them, and they won't buy in. Education and transparency are critical, not just for the athletes, but also for the parents and coaches. When it's done right, force play data helps reduce injury risk, guides smarter training, and empowers athletes to take ownership of their bodies. Over time, you'll also gain insight into what's working in your training programs. If you set up a training program for a team and everyone's getting fatigued, maybe it's time to rethink the training program and the load for your players. The teams that do this well are going to have a competitive edge, plain and simple. So looking at some use cases here, let's go back to the story that I opened with. Our senior center back was quietly pushing through a soft tissue injury during the biggest stretch of her high school career. She wasn't going to speak up. She didn't want to miss training. She didn't want to disappoint her teammates, and she definitely didn't want to put her college future at risk by sitting on the sidelines. But because we had a system in place, one that combined both subjective check-ins and objective data, we were able to flag something early, talk to her, and give her a week of rest before it got too serious. She came back healthy, helped lead the team through the playoffs, and protected her long-term future in the sport. That's the model we're talking about here. The problem is preventable injuries and mid-season fatigue. It starts with signals. Maybe it's a soreness rating on a weekly check-in form, or a coach noticing a dip in energy or mood during training. That subjective input is very important, but it's, like we said before, it's incomplete. The player might downplay the issue, or a coach might miss it if they're not paying close enough attention. That's where the objective data comes in. Things like force plate asymmetries, grip strength decline, or even subtle changes in jump strategy can be indicators of this. If a player starts showing a consistent shift in how they produce force, or their left-right balance is off compared to their baseline, that tells us something. Even if they say they're fine, the data might say otherwise. And that's our opportunity to intervene. Maybe that means modifying their training load, pulling them from a game, or just giving them a couple of recovery days. With the communication to the players and the parents, everybody's also on the same page as to why somebody's being sat down, and it doesn't become a bigger problem. Now, interpreting the data isn't always straightforward. Coaches like us are experts in tactics and team culture, but not everyone has a background in sports science. That's why we pair every program with an expert physiologist review. So someone trained in reading these complex outputs can say, hey, this player's force time curve shows a red flag. Here's what it likely means, and here's what we recommend. That's the bridge. It takes the guesswork out of athlete care. It helps coaches avoid burnout and injury without overreacting to every little dip in performance. And it empowers the athletes to be honest, because the system isn't punitive, it's supportive. We've seen this firsthand with our high school girls soccer team. The entire team completely bought into the program, even if they were told that the data was indicating something where they had to sit. It was really amazing to see. The result is smarter decisions, healthier players, and better performance when it matters most. Just like our center back, who was there for every playoff minute because we caught the problem early. So let's talk about how data can transform our talent identification. The problem is simple. Tryouts and team selections are mostly based on subjective impressions. Things like perceived skill, physical maturity, prior playing time, etc. That can work sometimes, but it often overlooks late bloomers or misjudges an athlete's long-term potential. Our process brings structure to this by pairing coach evaluations with objective data. Things like jump height, movement asymmetries, power output. By comparing those metrics across age, position, and team benchmarks, we get a much clearer picture of who has the physiological tools and development upside to excel. What that really means is it would be great if we could take the data from somebody's force plate jump and actually compare power metrics to a large database of similar athletes, their age, their size, soccer players, etc., to see where those outstanding high potential athletes are. So here's a great example of this. We worked with a high school football team that leaned very heavily on upperclassmen in its starting lineups because the school was very large. It's a safe choice. They had more time to develop. But when we tested all of our position groups, the data highlighted one underclassman with exceptional capacity and strategy markers off the force plates. He was a very explosive player. But as an underclassman, he didn't get a lot of playing time. Athletically, he stood out though. We also saw that his current position wasn't maximizing those strengths. So after sharing this recommendation and data with his coach, the coach moved him to outside defensive line. Within a few weeks, he had earned that starting role. He was able to very quickly prove himself based on those athletic markers. Without the data, he likely would have spent the season waiting his turn. Instead, he found his position, he made an impact, and he started accelerating his development years ahead of schedule. So that's the impact that we're talking about. So let's put it all together now, and I want to close with one more success story. So one of our athletes had a tough road through high school. She competed in both soccer and track and field. Between the long seasons, nonstop training, and a constant battle with injuries, she was never able to really fully stay healthy. From her freshman through junior years, she could make an impact when on the field, but she was frequently sidelined. Then, her senior year, everything changed. She started using performance testing and physiological monitoring to train based on what her body was telling her, not just how she felt. That meant no more convincing coaches she was fine when she wasn't, and no more skipping recovery when it was needed. The result, she didn't miss a single game during her team's championship run and competed in every event throughout the track and field season, making it all the way to the state meet in multiple events. At the end of it, she got something she never expected. There happened to be a Division I track coach from St. Thomas University in Minnesota at the track and field meet who offered her a D1 scholarship in track and field after the meet that night. Something she never planned on, she never expected, and that opportunity may have never happened if she wasn't able to stay healthy when it mattered. So that's all I have. I'll take any questions.
That was able to make these at all. The force plates, like how mobile are they? For example, or do they have to be at like a high school facility or a weight room?
They do well at high school weight rooms, but we shipped ours here in a specially made tote from Hawken Dynamics with wheels. You can essentially bring them anywhere. They're rechargeable. So they don't need to be plugged in when you're using them. You really just need a hard surface. So we brought that here and set it up, so you can set those up anywhere, really. And they're relatively affordable depending on the size of the program. I think to lease a set of plates for a year is about $4,500. So this,
computer that goes with them, or is it housed in the same plate?
they do send an Android tablet with it, but you can use any device. You just download the Hawken app. It's very easy to connect. And then with an integration with TeamGenius, we can easily add players into the Hawken system just before they do a jump and record all the data. So they're actually very mobile, relatively speaking, compared to like doing a VO2 Max, right?
Yeah.
So.
Right, so for example, so high school purchases the plates through TeamGenius. Do you assess the data that we collect as a team or school, or
Right.
do we then contract our own sports specialist or physiologist to assess that locally? How does
Yeah.
that work? So, like you say, so if I sign up and I purchase the plates, run the test for the season,
Mhm.
and we do a, say, a bi-monthly test, just
Mhm.
to check. Does that need to go to you? You assess it, and you give it back to me? How do
Right.
I implement that tool, other than just paying?
Yep, so, yes, so our physiologists have access to that through our cloud-based platform. So, what we did, the way we implemented this with a high school called Academy of Holy Angels in Minnesota, is we had all of their athletes come into our performance lab. So part of TeamGenius, if you're familiar with TeamGenius, we're a tryout software platform. We were acquired by a company called Human Powered Health, and Human Powered Health has performance labs for athletes in Minnesota, Boston, and Scottsdale, and we can also do remote testing by bringing equipment out to people. So with that said, the athletes came in groups pre-season to get a baseline assessment. They did force plate jumps and a few other tests, I think VO2 max, grip strength. The school then leased a set of force plates and put them in their weight room, and every Monday morning, every athlete would come in and do their weekly force plate jump. So this was mid-season, so it might be like if you're a football player, you just had a game on Friday, Monday morning jump test could tell all sorts of things about how you fared during that game, right? Or if you're a soccer player, if it was a multi-game week. So weekly jumps give us more data to look for trends on, and then our physiologists can just sit in our labs and watch the data come in remotely and do the analysis and get back to the coach with our recommendations. Does that answer your question?
Is there an additional, say, subscription for that service to continue to monitor? Is that included in the
Yeah, we would, depending on the size of the program, we would work with you to come up with a cost for the overall program for the year. And that would include all of the testing, the monitoring, and the software. So, does that help? Yeah. Any other questions? All right, sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate your time.